remember so vividly sitting there, and the thing that I said, and I say this transparently because I think so many times people will say, oh, well, I ran straight to the Lord, but I questioned it. I questioned God's goodness. Like, why would you take my child when I'm serving women who don't want their children? Like, it was just this dichotomy that I was really struggling with. And one of the many reasons I love our Lord is that He's okay with that. He's okay with us struggling through, and He was there every step of the way, with my questions, with my hurt and my pain.
I have an amazing guest in studio with me now, Jennifer Shelton, who is the CEO of Real Options. Jennifer, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
I'm so excited to share with our listeners the amazing work that Real Options is doing, as well as your story. So just for people who aren't familiar, Real Options is a pro-life pregnancy resource center that has been serving DFW for 37 years. And your goal is to share the hope of Jesus Christ with the most abortion vulnerable in our community by promoting a culture of life where abortion and sex outside of marriage are no longer chosen. And I love that just because it acknowledges that right off the bat, ultimate change is something that really comes through culture and changing people's hearts. And so I know you are, aware of the advocacy and involved in that, I'm sure, but just also reaching people where they are and meeting them in their need. So that's so beautiful. And we'll get more into the specific ways that you're doing that in a moment. But Jennifer, can you tell us your story? It begins with adoption, and there's an amazing twist in there that's definitely a God thing. So I'd love to hear your story.
Sure. So I have been at Real Options for 22 years. And so people will say, where did that come from? How did you get into this world? And it wasn't what I thought it was going to be. I actually planned on going into women's ministry. I got a biblical studies degree, and that's the direction I was going in. But the Lord had other plans and started opening doors and allowing me to hear a little bit more of my story. And then it all started making sense. So I was adopted, and back then all adoptions were closed. So neither side knew anything about the other. And so I was very content. I had a wonderful mom and dad, and never felt this urge, this need that I had to find her. But I was a senior in college and started having very vivid dreams of a young girl being pregnant. And every time I woke up, I just felt like the Holy Spirit said, find her. And so I called my dad, who happened to be a private investigator. That always helps. You just need one of those in the family, And so he found my birth mother's name, and he told my mom, and my mom's face went pale and she ran out of the room. She comes running back in carrying a coffee cup, crying. And he's like, what is wrong? And she said, I know her. So my birth mother was 14 when she got pregnant with me, and my mom was teaching her at the time. It was her favorite student.
Wow. Oh, my goodness.
And so my birth mother had a terrible home life, and so was in my mom's classroom after school most days. And when she had graduated high school, she had brought my mom this coffee cup, and she kept it all these years. Wow. And so my mom called my birth mother and said, do you remember me? And she said, of course, you were my favorite teacher. And she told her about me. And my birth mother just began to cry and said, if I could have picked one person in the entire world, it would have been you. And so the Lord allowed me to hear my story 6 months before I started working at Real Options, and realizing that I was that statistic that people talk about, that 14-year-old girl that had a terrible home life, who had all of these things against her, but she bravely chose life. And because of that, I am here, and now I can fight for life as well. So I'm so grateful for her courage.
Wow, that is just so amazing, the way that God works, and that He allowed that reunion years later, and just in ways that your birth mother didn't even know. He was providing her daughter with the care, that the best care she could have imagined. I just so amazing when I first heard that story, just the way that God works. But that was around the time, as you mentioned, that you began to be interested in serving women. And so tell us more about how you found Real Options and your role there to start with.
Sure. So I actually came to the Dallas area and was looking at more church type of roles, and got turned down and got turned down. I was literally sitting in a friend's living room on the floor when there used to be Yellow Pages. So, the younger listeners are going to be like, what's that?
I remember those.
So I opened up the Yellow Pages, and with the only logic being there had to be women at a pregnancy center, I called the first one.
Mm-hmm.
I had never been a part of the pro-life movement. I don't even know if I could have articulated what I thought about life, at that point, even though I was a Christian and of course I valued life, but I don't even think I could have articulated it then. And I called and said, do you have any jobs? And the girl said, no. And then I was hanging up and she said, wait, well, I'm leaving, so I guess so.
Oh.
And I was like, okay.
Yeah.
And she said, well, why don't you come in for an interview? So I did. I joke that I think God put holy earmuffs on me because I am certain if I realized what I was going to be doing, I would have hightailed it out of there. But God knew. So my very first day on my big girl job, right? And my predecessor, it was her last day. And as she walked out the door, she said, have fun being the sex lady. And I was like, what? I'm sorry, what? I'm going to talk about what? No. And so I spent the next 2 months, locked in my office crying, Lord, please, what am I doing here? And through his grace and his mercy, he just started downloading all of this information to me and ended up writing the curriculum that we still use today, and spent 9 years doing abstinence education and really nationwide. I would go to schools during the week and then fly out and do purity retreats, on the weekends. And it was just such an incredible experience. And then I went from there to doing some college outreach with our pregnancy center, and then was asked to come on as executive director and now CEO. So that's been kind of my journey.
That's amazing. And I just, again, it's God bringing full circle, you having the opportunity to be in high schools and speak to young people who might be in the situation that your birth mom was in.
Yeah.
And so now you had the opportunity, and still do, with the curriculum that you wrote that's still being used to minister to them. And so I want to talk more about the specifics, including that program, later in our conversation. But before we go to break, just give us a little breakdown. How many schools are using the curriculum you wrote, which is 180 degrees, and some of the statistics with that?
So I believe now we're in 54 public schools, which I think is amazing.
Wow.
And what I always said is that, my prayer before I went into a public school was, Lord, may they hear your voice even though I can't speak your name. And we were bringing in, a biblical concept. And of course, God's concepts are always the best. And so we're in about 54 public schools, I think 12 school districts. And then we also go to churches as well. So we have a Christian curriculum along with our secular curriculum too. So,
wow, that's amazing.
Last year, I think we have 3 full-time speakers now. So it's grown quite a bit. And I think last year they spoke to over 15,000 students. So it is growing, and it's been a blessing to see it.
Yeah. So Real Options, you are reaching the mom who is needing help, and then you're talking to the young people, to teenagers who are thinking about these things, encountering them. And I want to talk about that and give our listeners some details of how they can get involved and support that work. But as we talk, we definitely want to give you encouragement and inspiration and help equip you with resources to get involved in the pro-life movement wherever you're listening from. And so definitely stay with us, because we'll talk about some specifics in that regard in just a few moments. But Jennifer, let's continue on with your story. You began working for Real Options. You already shared your amazing adoption story with us and how God brought that full circle in so many ways. But then you got married and began your own journey to motherhood, but you had some trials along the way.
Yes. I think so many little girls think, oh, well, get married, have babies, and, it's just going to go smooth, especially if we do everything God's way, then, it's all going to be smooth. And it wasn't. We had some trouble getting pregnant in the beginning, and then I had a miscarriage, and that was super hard, and really trying to figure out how to deal with that. And then just a couple of months later, I found out I was pregnant again, and was terrified. And we, week by week, we kept making it. And then I was about 10 weeks and actually had a sonogram at our pregnancy center and found out that there wasn't a heartbeat anymore.
Oh.
And I remember so vividly sitting there, and the thing that I said, and, I say this transparently because I think so many times people will say, oh, well, I ran straight to the Lord, but I questioned it. I questioned God's goodness. Like, why would you take my child when I'm serving women who don't want their children? Like, it was just this dichotomy that I was really struggling with. And one of the many reasons I love our Lord is that he's okay with that. He's okay with us struggling through, and he was there every step of the way with my questions, with my hurt and my pain. And so I took a couple of weeks off of work and but went back to work, and it was Thursday evening. So I thought, okay, we won't have that many clients. It'll be kind of an easy, back into the grind of stuff. And a young girl walked in, and there was no one else to see her. We were triple booked, and it was only me.
Wow.
And I remember asking the Lord, please just put me on autopilot and let me serve her, because I just can't do this. And so we sat down together. I was going through the intake, and of course asked her, have you ever had an abortion before? And she said, yeah, but it didn't bother me. I said, okay. So we kept going, and the Holy Spirit just kept saying, tell her your story. And I thought, she doesn't want to hear my story. This isn't about me. It's about her, all the things. But the Holy Spirit wouldn't let it go. And so finally I just looked at her and I said, listen, I know you said that you had an abortion and it didn't affect you, and I respect that, but I want you to know that I just had 2 miscarriages and I'm grieving. And if you ever need a safe place to grieve, this is it. And she just broke.
Wow.
And started crying. And she looked at me and she said, I want to show you something. And she took a sonogram picture out of her wallet and she handed it to me. And she said, this is my son the day I aborted him. And I have grieved every day and couldn't tell anybody.
Wow.
And so that day, I had been questioning if I could stay in the pro-life movement. How can I stay in the pro-life movement when all I want so desperately is a child? And that day, 2 mothers grieved together. We prayed together. We healed together. And because of that, I knew that God could still use me in this movement. And that young lady chose life that day. So I, said, okay, God, I'm going to stick this out. I'm going to do this, and I'm going to walk this road no matter how hard it is. And year after year, just continuing to have faith. And I went on a staff retreat to the Billy Graham, the Cove, and I felt like the Holy Spirit said, I want you to go and spend some time with me. And I honestly didn't want to. I was just like, not today. And I took my Bible and my journal pretty much begrudgingly and stomped off down this trail. And there was, down the trail, there was nothing. It was just in the forest, and they have these little benches all over. And so I was all by myself sitting there, and I just broke. And I just cried out to the Lord and said, Lord, I'm going to trust you and I'm going to follow you, whether you choose to allow me to be a mother this side of heaven or only on that side. And I heard my name. I actually turned around and I thought it was my husband, and there was no one there. And the presence of God fell, and I knew he had spoken my name. And he said, I'm going to give you the desires of your heart. And then he told me to write a letter to Ava Jane. So I opened up my journal and I started writing to this little girl that I didn't know if I'd ever really meet, and wrote to her. And I held that in my heart for year after year after year. And 9 years later, my husband and I had gone to a praise and worship night, and he had leaned over and he was praying over me, but I couldn't hear him. And I had knelt down and asked the Lord, what do you want us to do? Because we had had failed adoption attempts. We had had all these things. And he said, do nothing. And at that point, I was not happy. I was like, I'm tired of doing nothing. But he said, do nothing. Just trust me. And about a week later, I found out I was pregnant. And then I started having complications again. And I just thought, I can't handle grief. I can't handle this again. And so we went to my first sonogram appointment, and I couldn't even look at the screen. And all of a sudden, my husband said, "There's a heartbeat."
Oh, wow.
And so I start crying.
Yeah.
And the sonographer said, "Do you want to know about the date of conception?" And so she told us, and it was the night of the praise and worship night. And my husband starts crying and said, "The Lord told me to lay hands on you and pray that your womb would be opened." And then, 9 months later, our little Ava Jane was born.
Oh my goodness. What a testimony, and just God's faithfulness in leading you and using you even in your grief, and then blessing you. And something you shared in your testimony that is available online, and I watched before this interview. What's the meaning of your daughter's name?
Yeah. So a couple of years after he gave her name to me, he woke me up in the middle of the night and said, "Go look it up." And so I did, and it means God's gracious gift of life.
Wow. So beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And just, such an amazing testimony. And I'm sure that touches the hearts of so many women listening. So let's talk a little bit more about the work that you're doing. So God led you to Real Options, and now you are heading up the organization. And we want to talk about ways people can get involved in the pro-life movement, no matter where they are listening from. But you're doing some amazing work. So just in 2024, you served over 1,000 women, had 671 decisions for life, provided 898 sonograms, and 88 decisions for Christ. And I love that too, because I'm sure when women come in to a place like Real Options, yes, there's the immediate need of, I'm pregnant and I don't know what to do, but there's deeper pain. There's a spiritual longings there as well that you guys are able to minister to and probably pull on your own testimonies, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. The gospel is at the core of who we are and what we do and why we do it. And actually, our tagline is helping to save lives on earth and for eternity, because that's one thing is we, of course, want to save that child so that we can see the legacy from that. But that is only a lifetime versus eternity. And so we want to do both. And if we can introduce that mom and dad to Jesus, and then that child gets brought up in a Christian home, that's the biggest win there is. And I truly believe this. I feel like the Lord gave me this a couple of months ago, is that I really believe that we're going to have a revival out of pregnancy centers, because there are people who walk through our doors that we get to share the gospel with that would never step foot in a church. And we're seeing it. We're seeing those transformations. And so that to me is one of the biggest wins we could have.
Absolutely. Well, if there's anything that has stuck out to me as a theme from just our conversations today, is that if you think God can't use you, you're wrong. And if you think he can't use you in the pro-life movement, you're wrong. In the last hour, if you were listening then, we talked with Jeff and Tricia Bradford, and abortion is a painful part of their own story. They have been so transparent about, but the Lord has healed that and redeemed them, and now they're doing amazing work. And God used you, Jennifer, in painful parts of your life story and brought them full circle. And I want to encourage you, if you are listening, this is such an important way that we can serve the whole person, literally from the very beginning of life to anything else that a woman and families might be going through. This is such an important work of the Lord. And I want to also talk about how you don't stop ministering to the woman, even if she chooses to have an abortion. And that is such a picture of grace. And it's probably not too common in many places in the pro-life movement, but there is still ministry that is needed, and God can still work in those moments. And you were telling me a story over the break, Jennifer. Do you want to share that?
Sure. God has value with all of us, and regardless of our sin, he loves us and he wraps his arms around us. And that's what we should do with any woman, regardless of her choice. And so we actually had the opportunity to do that with one of our clients who came in, and we did all the things we were supposed to do, the counseling, the sonogram, all of it, and she chose abortion. And some people may think that was a failure, but we continued to minister to her, love her, walk with her through that journey. And we actually got her plugged into one of our partnering churches. She heard the gospel. She accepted Jesus as her Savior, got so excited about Jesus, went home and told her teenage son that he had to go to church with her. And he had been partying and doing all the things. And he's like, Mama, I'm not going to church. And this amazing client, she's just teeny tiny, but just mighty. And I could just see her looking at him going, you are going to church with me. Mm-hmm. And so he went, he heard the gospel, he accepted Jesus. He got so excited about Jesus. He went home and called up his best friend who he had been partying with. And he's like, you got to come to church with me. He's like, dude, I'm not doing Jesus. I'm like, no. Mm-hmm. And finally, convinced him to go one day and heard the gospel, and he accepted Jesus and got saved. And we had some of our people there when all three of them got baptized. And so, beauty from ashes.
Absolutely.
And it was a privilege to be there.
Yeah, it's not our place to give up on somebody when God hasn't given up on them, and He can always work. And so, and you offer post-abortive counseling and recovery for women, and that's something we talked a little bit about in the last hour, but that is such a need because it touches so many women's lives. I think that we probably all know people who've walked through that. We may not even be aware of it. So what are some of the other ways? Obviously, your Pregnancy Resource Center, when many of our listeners are aware of that, they think of someone coming in, they have maybe an unexpected pregnancy, maybe they need material help and resources, they need to get plugged in, and they maybe get a free sonogram. And so obviously you do all of those kinds of things, but you are helping in so many unique ways too. And I think this can be an inspiration for other ministries or people who are wanting to start ministries in other places around the nation. So tell us about some of the unique ways that you are serving, really, again, every member of the family through your work.
Absolutely. Well, we are seeing a lot more pregnancy centers start up fatherhood programs, which I'm so excited about, because 1 in 4 women have had an abortion by the time they're 45. That's the same with men. 1 in 4 men have participated in an abortion. And so we have a lot of men and women who are hurting out there, and we realize that we have to let's work it from both sides of the equation. So when a couple comes in, let's talk to both of them. So I actually work with my husband, and he is over our men and family outreach. So he speaks to our dads, and I think that Satan has been so clever with this. He has told men that they do not have a voice here. If you don't have a womb, you don't get to, say anything about this. And the verbiage that he has given them to say is, I'll support whatever you want.
Yeah.
And what I have found through talking to countless women who've had abortions before, whose partner said those very same words, they said, as soon as they said that, all the weight came to me. Everything was my choice. And so all the shame and guilt is mine.
Wow.
And so it is such a clever way for Satan to take away the voice of the men who God has entrusted to protect us.
Wow.
And so we created our fatherhood program, and we actually had a couple who walked in, young couple, both of them, abortion-minded. She went through the counseling and the sonogram. My husband talked to the young man and asked him, well, what do you want to do? And he said, well, I would like to keep this baby. And he said, well, have you told her that? And he said, no, I told her whatever she wants to do, I'm going to be respectful. And my husband really pressed him and said, why don't you tell her you want to be a dad?
Yeah.
Just tell her, give her those words. And even after the sonogram, the girl was so hard and said, no, I'm having this abortion. Nothing's going to change my mind. They left. The next day, the girl called back, and her first words were, what did that guy say to my boyfriend? We're thinking, oh, no. And she said, we got in the car, and he looked at me, and he said he wanted to be a dad. Wow. And that's all I ever wanted to hear. And that was it. That's what changed their minds. And so not only are we getting to use this fatherhood program inside our clinic, but also we've had some really unique opportunities to take that same fatherhood inside the jails.
Wow.
And so we actually started the first class in Collin County, and it filled up with a waiting list, and then another one filled up with a waiting list. Most of these men that are in jail never had fathers, so they don't have the knowledge to be fathers themselves. And if we can get down to the roots of what's causing abortion, like fatherlessness and these type of things, that's when we're really going to change the culture. And so that's one way. And then another way is by partnering with anti-trafficking organizations. We realized that there was a real intersection between anti-trafficking, their efforts and our efforts, because about 85% of survivors have had abortions by the time that they're rescued. Many of them forced, and many of them have had multiple ones. Many of them are pregnant when they are rescued, and so we wanted to be able to be a safe place for them to land. And we realized that from talking to some of these organizations that some of them had poor experiences at pregnancy centers, not because the pregnancy center did anything wrong, but because their trauma is so very different.
Yes.
I mean, if you just think about sharing the gospel and you talk about sin with someone who's been in captivity for 10 years, that is a very different concept, right? And so we went to these organizations and said, teach us how to talk the language, to do the things, to be a safe place for them. And so we kind of have a task force now to be able to serve all of those survivors. And we did that by bringing on a mid-level nurse practitioner, so she can do a little bit more things than our regular nurse and sonographers. And so trying to expand and really get to the roots of things.
Yeah, that is amazing. And that is unfortunately such a prevalent issue. And so just amazing work that you are doing and being trauma informed to meet people in different situations where they are. That is so needed. And so again, for listeners, if you're thinking, well, I don't know much about the pro-life movement, but I have counseling experience, or, you have experience in different ways, God can use that.
Absolutely.
And so there are so many needs within the pro-life movement. And I love what you said about fathers, because as we have mentioned on this program before, so many women want to parent, but they don't feel like they have the support that they need. And again, it's that lie that it sounds supportive to say whatever you want, but you hear, I don't really want to be a dad, or I'm not going to be there for you. And I've spoken with people who have heard the opposite, just like in that story, and said, hey, it's going to be okay no matter what. I'm going to be here for you. And that changes everything.
Yeah.
That's so that is amazing that you are doing that. One thing I do want to talk about, though, is how has the landscape changed post Dobbs? Because we know that Roe versus Wade was overturned, which is great. But now you have the abortion pill, which is just becoming such a problem. I mean, even just some of the things you're telling me over the break. And so, I mean, we're about to go to another break, but we have about a minute. So give us a little bit of the kind of a preview of how that's changed things. And then after the break, we'll dive more into that.
Sure. I've been in the movement for so long, it's changed, but this has been the biggest catalyst. And the best way I can explain it is, before we had to convince a woman to walk through our doors instead of the abortion clinic's doors. Now we have to convince her to walk through our doors instead of sit on her couch, watch Netflix, and wait for her abortion pills to arrive. Wow. It is a very different ask, and it's made things a lot harder.
And it's not pro-woman.
No.
The way that this is being handled. And so again, I mentioned this in the last hour, but we do have a booklet available, Biblical View on Chemical Abortion. I wrote it. It has a lot of research and data in it, just so you can understand how prevalent chemical abortion, or the abortion pill, is, especially now post Roe and after the Dobbs decision, and what it actually does. Because Jennifer, and I'm sure you guys are seeing this too, so many women are just uneducated about what the process actually is, and they are not being informed by the abortion providers who are sending these pills out. So tell us more about some of the challenges that pregnancy centers and pro-life advocates like you and like Real Options are seeing now, that really the battle is with the abortion pill. That's the leading cause of abortion right now. And so what does that change for people who are on the front lines with this?
Well, it's just a harder ask for them to come to us instead of just wait. But we are trying to educate them to help them to understand, because the other side is saying things like it's as safe as Tylenol. And we know that that's not true. We know the complications are way higher than they are stating that they are. We also are seeing women who are going across state lines to get abortions. We serve a lot of international clients as well from different countries. So they're going to other countries, bringing those back, bringing them back up over the border from Mexico. And they're unregulated. There's no medical advice happening with these. In fact, I have a good friend from Round Rock, who's a director at the Round Rock Pregnancy Center. And she, before it became illegal to order abortion pills in Texas, she actually ordered one on one of the websites, which, by the way, was the website that was flown over Texas Ranger Stadium, a crop plane with a big banner that said, get your abortion pills by mail with that website.
Oh, my goodness.
And so she went on, and she had to click that she was over 18, because no one ever lies about their age. And she had to click that she was within a certain time frame, which many women don't know what that is.
Right.
And that, basically she wouldn't hold them liable for all the things. And she checked out, and then she received an email that said, click this link to buy your perfume. So it redirected her, and it said, just buy the perfume and you will receive what you need. And so she bought this perfume, paid her money. I think it was $30. And a couple of days later received a envelope with a little baggie with 5 white pills. That's it. No instructions, no anything. And a part of that was they have you buy perfume so that, for instance, a minor is buying it, won't show up on her mom's credit card, right? Or if it also bypasses some of the issues with them sending abortion pills into Texas, if it looks like it's perfume versus abortion pills. So, I mean, it's just, the deception is just, rampant. Also, we had a woman who went to Kansas to get abortion pills, came back, and she had taken several, started bleeding again, went to the ER. They found a heartbeat. So she called the abortion clinic, and they said, just take all the other pills we gave you. Well, by the time she reached Real Options, she had taken 13 abortion pills.
Wow.
And so there's no regulation, there's no help. And the thing is that it's also creating abortions already has such a horrible emotional impact, but this makes their bathrooms abortion clinics. You can't ever get away from it. Every time you go to brush your teeth, you are in the abortion clinic you had the abortion in. It is this constant thing. Used to, it was about 10 years before someone would seek help for emotional stuff from an abortion. Now it's 6 months, a year, maybe. And so it's definitely had a huge impact on the women that are taking these pills.
And I imagine many of them, they are not prepared for what they are going to see.
Not at all.
And it also makes it so easy for like traffickers or abusers to covertly order these things. And then I've seen news stories about them, forcing women to take them as well. I'm curious, is this something that you can talk about in your school program and educate kids on? I know you educate them about a lot of things with the curriculum that you mentioned earlier.
We really can't. Now, if it comes up, which it does quite often, we can talk about the risk and some of the things like that. But because of so many rules and regulations with public schools, we know that is walking a very fine line. So we're able to, if they ask the questions, but it's not specifically in our curriculum, or we probably wouldn't get approved.
I see. And so that's, it's so important for Christians to educate ourselves.
Absolutely.
Talk to your kids about it. And if you think, this isn't something that my high schooler has encountered, I bet they have. I bet they know somebody who has dealt with this, unfortunately.
And I wanted to, one other thing, I'm really passionate about the next generation of pro-lifers because, eventually we're going to, age out. We're going to need. And so we actually recently, I wrote a curriculum called Life Ed, and it's basically pro-life apologetics for young people. How do you have these conversations,
Yes.
and how do you answer the hard questions? Like let's delve into all of those things, because they're getting bombarded on social media with all of these lies. And so, I mean, they're the ones that are going to combat it. I mean, these kids aren't going to come to me and ask me, but they're going to ask their friends.
Mm-hmm.
And if we can get that information to them, then that's where it's really going to spread.
Wow, Life Ed, what an amazing resource. So tell us where people can find that and some of the other resources, because even if people aren't local to DFW, where your clinics are, this is something that can serve as a model and inspiration for people everywhere. So where can they find resources?
Sure. So we have a donor or friends website, and then we also have a client website. Our donor website is friendsofro.com. And so if you want to get involved, if you want to volunteer, if for say the fatherhood program sparked your interest and you want to be one of our mentor dads, or you want to be one of our mentor moms, you can find a volunteer sign up sheet there. You can also get information about bringing our programs to your church and to your schools, things like that. If you know someone who needs some of our services, then you can go to our other website that is all about our services. So we have two, because we don't want our clients to feel like they have to give in order to get the services.
Mm-hmm.
So we separate those, and that is realoptionstx.com. So either one of those will either get our medical services, or you can get involved.
And then if people want to, for instance, look into the 180 Degrees program for their school districts, or the Life Ed maybe for their youth group, those are things that no matter where somebody is, they can look at those resources too.
Yeah, absolutely. Friends of RO has all of our programs, and you can click those. And with the 180, you can actually go to the website with all the schools, so you can see if we're in your schools, and if not, we would love to be there. So we would love any connections that they may have for that, and volunteers as well. If you're not in the state and you maybe are somewhere else, we can also get you connected with your closest pregnancy center. I'm on the board of Life Ambassadors of Texas, which is the Texas Coalition of Pregnancy Centers. So very well connected, and I want people to get involved. It doesn't have to be Real Options. Just get involved with the pro-life movement, and your local pregnancy center is the best way to do it.
Yes, and that's just so amazing that you are connected like that and equipping people. And yes, get involved. There are so many ways to get involved, no matter what you feel like your gifting is or your ability, whether that's supporting financially or materially or volunteering, being there to support women at this time. It's really needed right now. So Jennifer, thank you for sharing your story with us and sharing about the work of Real Options and just encouraging us right now at this moment in the pro-life movement.
Absolutely. It was a joy.
So thank you for being with us today. The show has flown by. We've had such great conversations and heard amazing stories and testimonies. So if you have missed part of the show, or you're just now jumping in and you're thinking, what were they talking about? That sounded really interesting. You can listen to the whole thing at pointofview.net. Also, you can find the show at Facebook and YouTube, or on Apple Podcasts, because Point of View Radio Talk Show is always available after the show in podcast format. And we encourage you to go back and listen and share. Well, that's all we have time for today. We'll see you next time on Point of View Highlights. Thanks so much for listening to today's Point of View Highlights. I'm Liberty McCarter, host of the Know Why podcast, a weekly podcast for young adults who want to know why they believe what they believe. If you have young adults in your life who would like more meaningful conversations like this, send them over to knowwhypodcast.com. And we'll see you next time on Point of View Highlights.